welcome to the first episode of the Consider Your Reference podcast. I am your host, Michael Hardwick. Thank you for listening in. The original name of this podcast was supposed to be the For Your Reference podcast until I did a little bit of research and saw that Sports Reference already had a podcast named For Your Reference. As I intend to use their various Sports Reference pages, I changed it to the Consider the Reference podcast, to avoid any sort of confusion. And with that out of the way, I intend to use this podcast to keep you informed about all of the latest happenings in the world of sports. As you'll see, that includes coverage of various sports, popular and niche topics. 3, 2, 1. On today's episode, we'll recap some finals and box scores from last night's contests, break down the MLB Hall of Fame vote, preview this weekend's NFL Conference Championships, and finish off with our wow moment play of the day. So, let's jump into some box scores, beginning with last night's college basketball slate. So for our first box score, we will look at the Drexel Dragons as they faced off against the North Carolina A&T Aggies. Drexel started out this game hot. They got out to a 31-19 lead at the half, but then things went sideways starting the second half as the Aggies outscored the Dragons 36-9 to start the second half. Some great halftime adjustments by first-year coach for North Carolina A&T, Philip Shumpert. He's still under 500, but some great adjustments in this game as his team, the Aggies, went on to win 68-55. Drexel's win probability had gotten over 90% just a minute and a half into the second half before falling to zero, obviously, by the end of the game. And North Carolina A&T wins by double digits after being down by double digits to start the first half. Moving on to Louisiana Monroe versus Marshall, the Warhawks versus the Thundering Herd. Marshall entered this game as the heavy favorites, ESPN giving them a 94% win probability to start the game, and the betting odds also favoring Marshall by an astounding 15.5 points. However, the Louisiana Monroe Warhawks were able to overcome those odds with senior guard Jamari Blackman's huge performance. He tied the game with a three-pointer in the last 10 seconds of regulation, also getting a steal in the last 15 seconds of the first overtime, setting up his teammate Thomas Howell with the game-tying dunk in the end of the first overtime, and then in second overtime, hitting a clutch three-pointer in double overtime to give Louisiana Monroe the 4-point win. Jamari Blackman played all 50 minutes, scoring 35 points, grabbing 8 boards, all while picking up just 1 foul in those 50 minutes of play. And now moving to the opposite end of the spectrum, a lot of offense in that double overtime game. Sam Houston State, the Bearcats, took on Seattle at home. And the Bearcats entered this game with a 15-5 record, and Seattle with a 16-4 record. And the Bearcats would go on to win this one 55-40 in a defensive struggle, holding Seattle to just 18% shooting from the field and 18.5% shooting from three, even while they turned the ball over 17 times compared to Seattle's 10. And the Bearcats of Sam Houston State would hold Seattle to just 5 assists throughout the entire game. And now each team has identical 16-5 records. And our final college basketball tilt comes courtesy of two bitter California rivals and future Big Ten schools, USC and UCLA. UCLA brought in a 17-3 record and their number 8 ranking, while USC had a 15-6 record but was unranked. USC would pull off the upset by double digits, 77-64, off the back of freshman Trey White's 31-point performance. USC had garnered only 1 vote in the coaches poll last week and none in the AP poll, but they are sure to vault up the standings with that win, likely into the top 25, maybe even the top 20, depending on the other teams around them. And moving over to the NBA, Kyrie Irving's hot streak is continuing. Kyrie Irving has been on a tear the past week, going back to last Thursday, Kyrie has scored 30 points in each of his last 5 games, including a 40-point performance last night against the Detroit Pistons. And during that run, he has averaged 7 assists as well. Despite this run that he has been on, the Nets have dropped 3 of those 5 games, including 130 to 122 last night at home. And the final box score of the night comes from the NHL. Trigger warning for St. Louis Blues fans, you aren't going to like this. Last night, Arizona Coyotes goalie Karl Vejmelka shut out the Blues in a 5-0 win for Arizona. Vejmelka stopped all 33 shots en route to the win, and that's now 2 great games in a row for Vejmelka, who won his last start on Sunday against Vegas, giving up just 1 goal on 33 shots faced. And now moving on to our big topic of the day, the MLB Hall of Fame voting. So first off, congratulations to Scott Rowland for being elected to the Hall of Fame with 76.3% of the ballot. He played for the Cardinals, the Blue Jays, the Phillies, and the Reds, so congratulations to fans of those fan bases as well for getting one of your players elected to the Hall of Fame. Rowland joins Fred McGriff in 2023, who was elected via the Veterans Committee. And now a breakdown of the ballot statistics. Todd Helton was one player who fell just short of election. He fell 11 votes shy of being elected. It would have been 10 had a ballot not been lost in the mail. There was one ballot from a San Francisco Chronicle writer who had voted for 10 players, including Helton, Rowland, and Billy Wagner, among several others, that got lost in the mail on the way to the committee. So Helton really would have been just 10 votes short, and Scott Rowland had been selected on 80% of the ballots that were revealed to the public before the official announcement. Ryan Thibodeau on Twitter has a great tracker for the Hall of Fame, and every time a new ballot is released by a writer, he's able to get it out, and everybody's able to see and track and follow along how each player is doing. Both Helton and Rowland were above the 75% threshold before the public ballots were released on Tuesday, but only Rowland at over 80% was able to get elected. Jeff Kent, in his final year of eligibility, falls around 30% short of election at 46.5%. He had received a great bump, gaining over 30 votes from various writers, but it looked to the Veterans Committee to get him elected, just like Fred McGriff did. I believe Jeff Kent received more votes in his final year than McGriff did. And I believe McGriff was elected unanimously. So look for Jeff Kent to be elected in the coming years the next time his era shows up on the committee's ballot. In terms of the normal Hall of Fame ballot, look for Todd Helton as well as Billy Wagner to be elected during next year's vote. Billy Wagner will be in his 9th year of eligibility, so closing in on those 10 years that you have on the ballot. Todd Helton and Billy Wagner both gained dozens of votes here in this year's vote. And Wagner, since he's approaching that 10-year threshold, will likely receive an even bigger boost and should get him the 7% that he needs to be elected. Along with those two, the next year's ballot will include newcomers Adrian Beltre, Joe Mauer, Chase Utley, and Matt Holliday. Now I'll go over what my ballot would have looked like had I been able to vote on the Hall of Fame for this year. Basically, my voting philosophy, I immediately discount anyone who used steroids. So in the past years, Barry Bonds or Roger Clemens would not have received my vote. And this year, Alex Rodriguez and Manny Ramirez would also not have received my vote. And so you can vote for up to 10 players, but I would vote for 8 in this year's vote. Those 8 players would have been Bobby Abreu, Carlos Beltran, Todd Helton, Andrew Jones, Jeff Kent, Francisco Rodriguez, Scott Rowland, and Billy Wagner. Todd Helton did play at Coors Field but he did have over 2,500 hits and nearly 370 homers, and batted .316. Those are Hall of Fame numbers. He needs to be in the Hall of Fame. Hopefully he'll be in next year in his 6th year of eligibility. Billy Wagner, one of the greatest closers of all time, with over 422 saves and 900 innings pitched, with just a 2.31 ERA, and his ERA plus, which just kind of takes an average, like an average of 100. If you have an ERA plus of 100, that's like an average player. His ERA plus is 187. Andrew Jones, who got 58% on this year's ballot. But Andrew Jones also had nearly 2,000 hits and over 400 home runs. His batting average was a little low at only 254, but I still think his home runs and his hits are good enough to get in as well. Let me just see about his defense. He also won 10 Gold Gloves, so those are definitely worthy of being in the Hall of Fame. Carlos Beltran, he got kind of wrapped up in the Houston Astros scandal, even though he was only there for one season. And it lost him a manager job, even though he was never really implicated in any of the evidence. He had over 2,700 hits as a player and 400 home runs, while also being a 9-time All-Star, 3-time Gold Glove winner, and 2-time Silver Slugger. So I don't think the Astros incident should be enough to discount him. As well, he also hit 280 and had a 350 OBP. And Jeff Kent, who, as I said, received 46.5% of the vote. That's actually identical to what Beltran received. Kent had 377 home runs, which is the most home runs for any second baseman in the entire history of the MLB. He had 1,500 RBIs and nearly 2,500 hits while batting .290. And then moving down the list, we have Bobby Abreu, who also batted .290, just like Jeff Kent. And his WAR was also 60.2. Very high numbers there. And he had nearly 300 home runs and a near 400 OBP. Great numbers there from Abreu, while also winning a Gold Glove and being a 2-time All-Star, as well as winning a Silver Slugger. And Francisco Rodriguez, who is more likely to get in when we see more closers getting in. Until Mariano Rivera and Trevor Hoffman, there weren't really a whole lot of relievers getting a lot of traction. But with Billy Wagner hopefully getting in soon, hopefully K-Rod will see an increase in his votes. He only received 42, but this was his first year on the ballot. He got 11% of the vote. So he ended up with 437 saves, which is actually more than Wagner did, and he pitched more innings. His ERA was slightly worse at 2.86, but he did have over 1,100 strikeouts throughout his career. And that will do it for my ballot. Now we can switch sports entirely to the NFL Conference Championships that are occurring this weekend. First up, San Francisco will be taking on the Philadelphia Eagles in Philly at 2 o'clock on Sunday on Fox. San Francisco's got a great defense, several stars on their defense, Nick Bosa and Fred Warner, among several others, not to even mention their offensive weapons, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, running back, wide receiver hybrid, Deebo Samuel, and a young QB in Brock Purdy, who has never lost a game in his 8 games that he has received significant time, including 2 playoff games so far. Philly boasts a dynamic offense with Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and they have their own 3-headed monster in the backfield, Miles Sanders, Boston Scott, and Kenneth Gainwell, and their own defensive stars to match up against San Fran's defense. They have Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, and C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who will give Brock Purdy a tough time in his biggest game of his life to this point. But like I said, the one thing Purdy has going for him is he's literally never lost a game. But if he gets down early, that could be a detriment. and he might not be able to dig himself out of that hole. I believe Philly will come out on top 27-16 in this contest. And the second game, a matchup of franchise QBs with Patrick Mahomes leading the Chiefs and Joe Burrow leading the Bengals. That game is at 5:30 on CBS on Sunday. Both teams with great supporting offensive weapons for their franchise QBs. KC has Travis Kelce and receivers Juju Smith-Schuster and Marquez Valdez-Scantling. And they kind of, with that, any running back that they have in the backfield is dangerous this year with Isaiah Pacheco doing the brunt of the work in the second half of the season. And they have Jerick McKinnon back there as well, who has done a lot of good work receiving the ball. And he had a great block against the Jaguars in their divisional round matchup on Saturday. So with all those weapons, there will be a threat and tough for Cincinnati's defense. But Cincinnati boasts their own offensive weapons with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd as their receivers, and Hayden Hurst at tight end, with Joe Mixon being a great running back out of the backfield, and Samaje Perine, who's done a lot of good work receiving, just like Jerick McKinnon has late in the season, and he's used for pass blocking as well. And it's very helpful for the Cincinnati offensive line, who has been a much criticized unit. And they will be under attack by the Kansas City defense, who had the second most sacks this season at 55, compared to just Cincinnati's 30 sacks for their defense. But Mahomes might not be at 100% this weekend, which will be a test for Kansas City's O-line on that end. He might not be as mobile. They might have to give him clean pockets in order to let him throw the ball downfield. He won't be able to do as much creating as they might expect him to do. But since he has already been able to rely on their defense in big moments, in their game against Baltimore, you might remember Cincinnati forced a fumble at the goal line from quarterback Tyler Huntley and returned it for the longest fumble return in playoff history at 99 yards. And they also shut down Josh Allen last week, holding him to just 10 points. And so for that reason, I think the Bengals are going to go back-to-back in Kansas City. Joe Burrow will go to 4-0 in his last 4 games against Mahomes, and the Bengals will win 27-23. And now for our wow moment of the week. If you watched the end of the Cowboys game, you might have seen one of the funniest plays of all time with Ezekiel Elliott lining up at center, all the linemen being split out wide, and then Dak Prescott throwing a slant pass to their punt returner, Robert Turpin, who held on for the catch as time expired. They didn't even try to get any laterals off, and Elliott got blasted by the San Francisco defense. It was just an insane play to watch, and I couldn't stop laughing. For 2 years in a row, I've just been laughing hysterically at the end of the Cowboys and 49ers playoff games. But I came across this play in the European League of Football from a couple years ago. The European League of Football was founded in 2020, and they began play back in 2021. They have 17 teams and numerous European countries, Germany, Italy, France, Spain, Poland, several other countries. Switzerland's in there, I believe, as well. But this play took place on the very first day of competition back in 2021 between the Wrocław Panthers of Poland and the Cologne Centurions from Germany. And so pulling up that play right now, the Centurions are an offensive drive here in the second quarter. They've already thrown 2 interceptions, including a pick 6 in the first quarter. And so rolling the play now, Centurions are throwing, and the pass is intercepted once again by the Panthers, looking for their second pick 6 of the day, a good return, and it's fumbled, forced fumble by the Centurions, and they're going to run it back for their own touchdown instead on a play that they threw an interception on. And look at the scoreboard graphic here. The Centurions have just scored, but they're going to award the points here on the scoreboard to the Panthers. It says touchdown Centurions, but then their score goes from 14 to 26 on the scoreboard before it's eventually corrected. So a wacky play Just had to share that. It's just one of the funniest plays I've seen outside of that Ezekiel Elliott play. So if you're not Mike McCarthy and the Cowboys, at least you did not lose on a play like that. And that will do it for episode 1 of the Consider the Reference podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, it's totally free, and share this episode with a friend who may also enjoy it. Also, leave a comment on what you enjoyed, what can be improved on, or a future topic you would like to see me cover. You can also follow me on Twitter at @the_realmwick7, or send an email to foryourreferencesports@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and have a great rest of your day.